I'm not a financial advisor. This channel is sponsored by the XX Network. History always constitutes the relationship between a present and its past. Consequently, fear of the present leads to mystification of the past.
In a recent poll, Americans were asked, do you think the nation's democracy is in danger of collapse? 69% of Republicans and the same percentage of Democrats said that they did think so.
History does not repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes. The debasement of money is a precursor for the end of a great empire.
However, I feel having studied, the history and evolution of money and just how human beings have evolved, I've come to the conclusion that that wars are going to be an unfortunate reality of our human society. That constant rivalry and insecurity about resources, whatever type of resources it is going to be part of human society. And when that sort of emotions exist at a macro level, there needs to be like a centralized entity, in my humble opinion, that kind of controls it. And the evolution of the power that we see over time is actually healthy. That's just the conclusion that I've derived. But I would love to live in a world that everybody is able to just trade with one another with no centralized entity kind of supervising, as to what the nations need to do. Because as we can see at the moment, like how US is treating their national currency as an asset in their war against Russia, that is not what a global reserve currency should be doing. Global reserve currency should be neutral. But yeah, I just don't see that ever happening in reality. I think we'll always have a reserve currency.
Countries around the world have lived beyond their means. High debt to GDP, you owe more than you bring in. Simultaneously, geopolitical conflicts are emerging, and these events are dividing us. Modern-day technology has created an interdependent system where we rely on each other for trade. In other words, no nation is independent. World War II was a catalyst for countries to borrow beyond their means, for their debt to exceed their production. This was temporary in order to win the war. Today, our debt is higher than our GDP, and these conflicts are accelerating. Or just starting.
Chairman of the Fed for probably 17 years or so, who said that one of the hardest and most unfair roles of a central banker is to remove the punch bowl away before the party gets going. That's an extraordinary unfair assignment. You invite people for a party, and then before the party gets going, to remove the punch bowl. And they ask you why, and you tell them because it's bad for you. How do you know? Why should we believe you? Because I have credibility. Because I've done it before and you know that. But if I'm unable to answer that question based on credibility, we have a problem. And that's why one of the greatest assets of a central banker is credibility. So falling behind is not only creating a gap between where you are and where you want to be, but it also creates a loss of credibility that makes it more difficult to do what you would have done if you were on time. So
10% inflation is a crack in the foundation of confidence that the central banks have. The fiat Ponzi only works if everyone believes fiat has value. When John and Jane Doe see their grocery bill exceed the norm, they start to have questions. Mainstream media might contort the truth into politics, but the public is becoming aware of the problem.
We may just rerun the 1970s. Though judging by recent events in the UK, we may do it at a rather higher speed, from the Barber budget to the winter of discontent in a matter of weeks rather than years. But, and this I mean very seriously, there is a scenario in which we get something closer to the 1940s, in which regional great power conflicts coalesce into something like World War III, albeit with smaller armies, many unarmed weapon systems, unmanned weapon systems, and far more powerful and accurate bombs. In such a scenario, ladies and gentlemen, we'll have to look for guidance not to Paul Volcker, but to Mariner Eccles, a now forgotten name, and Montague Norman, and we'll look back, I suspect, on the phrase quantitative tightening as an eccentric idea that almost no one was able to execute, the monetary policy equivalent of Monty Python's Ministry of Silly Walks. Thank you very much.
So let's set the stage. We have record high CPI, inflation is near 10%. The central banks are fighting inflation by raising interest rates, but at the same time our fiscal deficits are expanding at a rapid pace. If these conflicts continue to escalate, governments will need to print more.
Roberto just said, I would sum it up saying that we have an international consensus in the G20 and in the FSB. And the key challenge now is to implement it in each major jurisdiction. We did it in Europe. We have a so-called MiCA regulation, including for stable coins. The so-called crypto winter of early 22 should not be an excuse for complacency. On the contrary, it's time to act.
The Bank de France governor just let you know that the group of 20 of the largest countries have already decided what crypto regulations will be. The EU has already acted with MiCA regulations. The rest of the G20 will follow.
The fact that the new technology can change the old ways of thinking. Okay, so for example, the idea of a BRICS currency itself, although they're moving toward that direction, maybe, in my opinion, okay, I'll be controversial in saying this, outdated. We don't even need that because with digitization of the currency itself, we can have direct bilateral settlement. We have all these advanced DeFi techniques that can pull liquidity, solve some of the issues that they're facing, which would affect the monetary and fiscal policy, the strategy of these nations. So I think there's the disruption of the technologies side would allow a much more rich palette of design space to move in this direction than the traditional thinking of, oh, okay, now US dollars, are coming down. Do we create a supranational currency, which was talked about since Bretton Woods too? We can change that logic.
The reserve currency paradigm is over. Through tokenization, even the most illiquid assets can become liquid. As the central banks fail and fiat loses its value, people are asking the question, what is money? Through crypto asset technologies, anything of value can be tokenized and used for payments.
Let me turn now to the issue of tokenized banking liabilities. We are seeing banks explore a variety of different models to issue dollar-denominated tokens on distributed ledger technologies. The proposals range from issuance of tokens on private controlled networks to facilitate payments within or among banks, to proposals that explore issuance of freely circulating tokens on open, permissionless networks. As banks explore different options to tap into the potential of the technology, it is important to identify and assess the novel risks inherent in those models and whether those risks are surmountable. For instance, with some models that are being explored, the bank may not be able to track who is holding its tokenized liability, or whether its token is being used in risky or illegal activities. While there is work underway on technical solutions for managing these risks, it remains an open question whether banks can engage in such arrangements in a manner consistent with safe and sound banking and in compliance with relevant law. Given these open questions, banks looking to experiment with these new technologies should do so only in a controlled and limited manner. As banks experiment, I invite them to engage with their regulators early and often, discuss the benefits and risks associated with these new use cases, ensuring that they are consistent with banking activities being conducted in a safe, sound, and legally permissible manner.
Michael Barr was a former Ripple board member. Now he works for the Federal Reserve. Michael is addressing stablecoins. Innovation is encouraged. Testing in controlled environments is allowed, but they still have some laws to iron out regarding Know Your Customer. He is specifically addressing the problems at the retail-facing end. What about the back end? Those problems he listed are only problems if the banks are dealing with consumers. Ripple is providing products for the back end.
And on your question about the crypto, I think what we are trying to do is build a system in which we have 4 big groups. An instant payment system that is widely accepted, which is called PIX, an open finance system that is really open and very agile and is digital in itself, a digital currency that is nothing but a tokenized deposits, so that the bank will issue a digital currency in the form of a token. In other words, the digital currency of Brazil is going to be a stable coin issued by the banks on their deposits. So by nature, they will start being custodians of digital assets because they will be doing that. And when you merge these 2 blocks, what you have is a system that brings the DeFi world and the crypto world and the digital assets into something that you can actually see and understand. Thank you.
This is Roberto Campos Neto. He's a governor for the Central Bank of Brazil. This slide was leaked from Jim Cunha from the Federal Reserve. It states that Brazil is working with Ripple to build a prototype for retail CBDCs.
And when you merge these 2 blocks, what you have is a system that brings the DeFi world and the crypto world and the digital assets into something that you can actually see and understand.
Open finance system that is really open. The banks will issue tokenized deposits, i.e. stable coins, are issued from customer deposits. In other words, I put $100 into my bank and the bank mints a $100 stable coin. He says when you do this, you will merge digital assets, DeFi, and the crypto world. He specifically mentioned it being open, and he specifically mentioned crypto. He says that that's going to merge with DeFi and crypto. That means that they're building something that is public or a crypto asset, not a walled garden, but an ecosystem where you can take advantage of DeFi.
We're on phase 3 of the project. There'll be some announcements over the next few weeks around where we are with them and what's happening. But it's all around getting a CBDC to operate in the country. Importantly, one of the reasons why Bhutan chose Ripple is because we use XRP ledger, which is sustainable and is carbon neutral to carbon positive. It's a very important part for that country. And then on the other side, we have Palau. Palau is an island nation. And Palau is a US dollar, a dollarized country, which means they use the dollar in everything they do, but they're not, they're not part of the US, they're not one of the states, etc. What we're building for them is a stable coin, a stable US dollar coin, which is backed by the bank. So they don't have a central bank in Palau, that's why they don't have their own currency, etc. But they have a finance ministry and they have, call it affiliations, with American banks. So basically, one of the big American banks would be the backstop for this stablecoin. So it is the same as a US dollar in all intents and purposes, because obviously that American bank is backstopped by the Federal Reserve and the bank there.
Anthony Welfare just leaked something juicy. A large US Fed-backed bank is going to be the backstop for the Palau dollar. Think about what Michael Barr said earlier about testing in controlled environments. There is a future to this technology. It's a very long, drawn-out movie, but you know the ending. You know it's coming. These are the banks in Palau. None of these seem like a large enough bank to have an account with the Fed, except for the ABD Bank, which is the Asian Development Bank. The Asian Development Bank was modeled after the World Bank. Japan and US have the highest voting power, and as you know, Japan has been very friendly to Ripple, and many banks in Japan, like SBI, are using Ripple tech.
But 50 years from now, I think things will be even more electronic and driven more and more by input from humans into computers on how to trade, how to take risks, and to make sure they don't go over their limits.
You used to own some Bitcoin?
I do.
You still own it now?
Yes. Look, I'm in a company called Current, a young man who started this company. I put money with him. Zoe Cruz, who you know and met before. She runs a fund, I'm invested in her, and then through my family office we have some outright positions in crypto.
John Mack is a former Morgan Stanley CEO. He owns Bitcoin. He also invested in a company called Current. In this TechCrunch article, Current originally started with Bitcoin addresses and Ripple gateways. John is also invested in a company with Zoe Cruz. Zoe Cruz is a Ripple board member.
These institutional prospective investors used to be our clients at Morgan Stanley, and I'm very clear of their needs. I think zero asset allocation to this space is the wrong answer. More than 10% is also the wrong answer. This is a nascent industry. It's very early. And ironically, even if they put 1% of, some of those are pension funds, ironically, they want to see actually a much more robust regulatory framework to come in here. So I actually feel all those discussions we have with regulators, if we come to a fruitful end, you're going to see a lot of money coming into that space. Without that, they won't. So I'm very clear that the smart money is, if you look at all the institutional clients that are looking at this, at the moment, it's not quite pencils down because we are in the middle of crypto winter. And they are worried about 98% of their portfolio, the 60-40 portfolio, they need to spend a lot of time on, looking at the macro picture of the world. But they're being very thoughtful about its temporary pencils down, but they're taking this space very, very seriously. There are $200 trillion worth of public securities. If 1% comes into that, you're talking about $2 trillion of new money coming in. This money is only going to come in, as I said, if we finish those conversations with global regulators.
Brian Armstrong, as well as Kevin O'Leary, have said the same exact thing as Zoe Cruz. On the top right-hand side, there's a link for more information. Sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, when they take positions in this asset class, they will move the markets. Traditional financial advisors were taught 60-40 stocks and bonds. That portfolio setup is facing the worst returns in 100 years.
Well, I don't really need to tell you what keeps me awake at night. I think I already made that fairly clear. If you don't wake up to check for alerts for geopolitical escalation, you're not really understanding how the historical process works. I think if one comes to the question of is monetary policy sufficient, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a previous governor of the Bank of England, Mervyn King, about a year before the financial crisis began. And I asked him, what will you do if I'm right in thinking that a crisis in US mortgages is going to have huge spillover effects? And his reply was immediately, monetary policy won't be sufficient in that contingency. We've war-gamed it a lot. Andrew, you probably are aware of this. And we know that there will have to be a substantial role for fiscal policy in such a scenario, as of course proved to be true, and also proved to be true in the pandemic. The idea that monetary policy was the only game in town, which was briefly fashionable in this community, was always a fantasy. And it bore no relation to historical reality, because historical reality, as the paper I cited cites, is that there are periods of over 400 years of very large-scale central bank accommodation of fiscal expansion. And that's how it's worked again and again, particularly in times of geopolitical or financial crisis. So I think it's fairly clear that if I'm right that there is a worsening of the geopolitical situation, you can expect there to be a fiscal and monetary response. The problem is we start from a fiscal point of view, an already quite stretched position.
This system runs on perpetual debt, where raising interest rates in the system is brittle. Geopolitical tensions are accelerating that will require more spending. They're trying to raise interest rates and lower inflation, but there are no choices. At one point, they start printing money again. Simultaneously, crypto is maturing, becoming regulated. Governments are utilizing the technology. Central banks are utilizing the technology. Creative destruction is happening. From the destruction of the old spawns a new system.
If we could have the technology to really help the people that are doing good and prevent people to monopolize information, monopolize reserve currency, monopolize SWIFT, the world will be better. So this is my hope that what we're doing is useful. It's not because America is bad or China is not about this. It's to make sure the bad things does not happen, even for US, for China, for India, for every country.
Technology is neutral. It can benefit humanity or it can be used as a tool of oppression. I've met a lot of technologists and innovators that are trying to make the world a better place. The centralized power will do what it can to oppress, but I am hopeful that they will fail, and the good guys will succeed at making the world a better place.
Today, in modern social media, people rent their identities. You rent your ability to use it. They are walled gardens, little oligarchies that the second those who run them don't want you there, you're gone. This is a far cry from the way that we imagine communication, which are censorship-free and surveillance-free public squares, places where we can express ourselves in order to converse and not in order to be punished. And I think that most people will agree that people really should have the right to self-govern and self-moderate and speak for themselves without fear of reprisal. And that is what we are building right now. Speakeasy is this. It's the freedom to express yourself, be it your thoughts or beliefs, and at any scale. It can be a small group of friends or it can be to millions of people. Speakeasy is the ability to talk about what you want because it is the first surveillance and censorship-proof social media system. And it creates an environment where your speakeasy is yours. Speakeasy isn't owned by me. It's not owned by the XX network. It is owned by the users. This is a product where users can create, share, and communicate with absolute privacy. Or they can open it up to the world. You can create your own speakeasy or you can join others with their invite. These systems are the users to manage and the users to own.
The poverty of our century is unlike that of any other. It is not, as poverty was before, the result of natural scarcity, but of a set of priorities imposed upon the rest of the world by the rich. Thanks everyone, I hope you enjoyed the show. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you enjoy content like this and want to help support my channel, please consider joining my Patreon.